Senator, good day. Good to see you. Welcome to Texas.
It's not often I'm on the left, but
Well,
you're right. That's
Senator, it gets better. It's okay. Glad to have you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I thought, Senator, in the time we have, we would begin productively by talking about immigration, since this is San Antonio, where a conversation about immigration, an elevated conversation, is almost always taking place. This is an issue that you know very well, but mostly because of Jeb Bush, whom we're still talking about a week later. As you know, your friend, the former governor of Florida, very possibly the father of the future land commissioner of Texas, said last week that illegal immigration was an act of love. That was his phrase, by people who were trying to provide for their families. And as you know, politically speaking, all hell broke loose when he said that. Conservatives balked. Their response was basically time for some traffic problems in Fort Lauderdale. You know, they were very upset at Governor Bush for having said this. And in fact, the mere mention of his name this weekend was booed at it was called the New Hampshire Freedom Summit. Would you talk about that? You've responded to questions about Governor Bush in the last couple of days. We're still talking about it a week later. Can you tell us what you think?
First of all, the answer and the reaction to it illustrates what a difficult issue this is politically. On the one hand, I think people recognize that we, like every sovereign country on the planet, have immigration laws and have a right to enforce them. On the other hand, we recognize that illegal immigration is not an issue of statistics. These are human beings with lives and families and decisions by why they made it. And a significant number of people that come to this country illegally do so in search of a better life. And even in my own book, I detailed where, you know, if I was in a situation where I was desperate to provide for my family, my children were hungry, there's very little I wouldn't do to provide for them. So I think his comments kind of reflect the difficulty of it. But on immigration in general, I would just say 2 points. I think the first is that there's a growing consensus in this country that the status quo is unsustainable. I think we have a broken legal immigration system that doesn't work well. It's not a 21st century immigration system, beginning with the fact that it's not merit-based, that it doesn't reflect the economic realities and needs of our country in the 21st century. For that reason alone, it needs to be reformed. We also have enforcement problems. Our existing laws are difficult to enforce because we don't have an enforcement mechanism in place to do so. There are sectors of the border that remain insecure, but 40% of the people that are in this country illegally entered legally. And then and then overstayed. And that's why you need a better system of tracking tourist visas to ensure people are leaving when the time expires, or some sort of method where employers can verify the immigration status of the people that they're hiring. The politically difficult part is, what do you do with 12 million people that are in this country illegally? And I think that there's a consensus that you're not going to round up and deport 12 million people. And there's also a consensus that you're not going to grant blanket amnesty to 12 million people. So somewhere between those two positions is the answer to this problem. And I think by and large, the emerging consensus is that if you can put in place enforcement mechanisms that give people confidence that we're not going to have this problem again in the future, the American people are prepared to begin to address the reality that we have 12 million people in this country that are here illegally, but the vast majority of whom are going to be here for the rest of their lives. And the process by which you do that is a process that, but more or less, there will be consequences for having violated the law. You'll have to pay a fine. You'll have to go to the back of the line. You're going to have to wait for a defined period of time. But eventually, over that period of time, people will be able to access permanent residency and even potentially citizenship one day.
Not a pathway to citizenship as far as it goes. That phrase is freighted with all kinds of controversy.
No, but I think that there's 2 points that people have to understand about immigration. There is no such thing, per se, as a pathway to citizenship in the way it's normally discussed. What happens is there are 2 ways to enter this country. One is on a temporary basis, and one is on a permanent basis. No one enters this country, with a rare exception, on a permanent basis and becomes a citizen. You enter the country, you get a green card, you become a legal permanent resident. And after 5 years in that status, then you can apply for citizenship, which is its own process. And I think in the bill that we passed in the Senate, for example, it was a bill that said that if you had violated the immigration laws of this country, you would have to wait 10 years in a new temporary status. And after the 10-year period expired, you could then apply for permanent residency. And once you got that permanent residency, after another 3 to 5 years expired, you could apply for citizenship. So citizenship isn't awarded now, and it wouldn't be awarded either. There's some debate about the last part of it, whether you should have citizenship or not. I think that that's an issue that can be debated validly. There's some that argue that if you violated our laws, you should never have the benefits of citizenship. The counter viewpoint, which I've expressed, is that I don't think it's good for our country to have millions of people here that are permanently barred from becoming Americans.
But as a practical matter, Senator, that is the hitch. I mean, in some
No,
ways...
I don't. I mean, I think that the central hitch is, what do you do with people that are here right now, today? If you ask people that are illegally here right now, the thing they most want is the ability to have some level of legal status so they can work and pay taxes and get on with their lives. Citizenship is something that politicians talk a lot about because some view it as a pathway to voting. But real people in everyday life, what they want immediately, now I'm not saying long-term it's not a concern, but what they want most immediate is just some level of stability so they can go on with their lives. By and large, I think there's a matrix there for solving it. I think the impediment is not what we're going to do. I think the real impediment is how are you going to do it? Number one, are you going to do it in one big piece of legislation at a time when really comprehensive anything is going to be very difficult to get done? There's a true distaste, and rightfully so, for comprehensive pieces of legislation. And the other is, a lot of people will say, we are prepared to do something about this problem, but only if we can make sure that this never happens again. And the argument I most often hear, and to be frank, is very difficult to push back on, is the argument that they're already ignoring the law in other areas. What is to say that in the future you won't have an administration that decides to go forward on the legalization but never does the enforcement, and 10 years from now we can be dealing with another 12 million people. So those are the hurdles that have to be overcome, and what I've argued at this point is, I think perhaps the best way forward on how to do it is to do it in an incremental, sequential process.
Bit by bit.
Where we begin to build one upon the other. You begin to deal with the legalization, that you create the legal system that works, you create the enforcement mechanisms that works, then you create stability for the people that are here illegally, and then eventually continue to build out that way. It doesn't happen all at once, but I think that's a lot better than continuing to go in circles here and this all-or-nothing approach that for 14 years has led to nothing.
Well, as a practical matter, Senator, politically right now, you couldn't do an all-or-nothing. You couldn't do an all approach right now. The window for doing an all is closing, and if the Republicans take back the Senate, as may very well happen come November, the prospect of getting an all approach done in the next 2 years is pretty much zero.
And at the end, I don't think that the all approach ever had a high chance or probability of success. The Senate went in that direction. I argued against going in that direction. I argued clearly that we should move forward in a sequential process. But that's the direction the Senate went, and I chose to want to influence what that looked like. I think many of the ideas that we came up with as part of that process will ultimately be a part of whatever we arrive at in the future. So that was an important endeavor from that perspective. But I think if you tried to do comprehensive tax reform, if you tried to do comprehensive regulatory reform, if you tried to do anything comprehensive now, given the nature of American politics today, it would be very difficult to get done.
The compassion that Governor Bush expressed, and candidly the compassion that you expressed, the sort of reality of the situation that you're demonstrating in your remarks, can you have compassion these days in this political environment without being tagged as weak?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think truth is truth, and you have to deal with it. And now, look, the immigration problem in America is multifaceted. So not every person who's here illegally came in search of a better life. I mean, some came for multiple different reasons. They came legally and chose to overstay. Some purposely violate the law. I mean, I live in Miami-Dade County. I'm sure you have those problems as well here. I know people, I've met people, and I've heard about a lot of people who deliberately come to the U.S. simply to have a child to be born a U.S. citizen. And they go to our public hospital, and then they leave afterwards, and that's wrong, right? And I'm not saying that's a majority, but that's real. I also know people that are desperate because their family, their wife cries every night, their children are hungry and desperate, and they just want a better life for their families. I know people that would love to go back home, but they know if they leave, they're going to have to sneak back in to get here next year.
You have sympathy for those people.
When they're, like I said, it's a multifaceted, but these are human beings. So when you deal with human beings, you deal with a lot of diversity in terms of what's going on in their lives and that reality there. So I think that it's important not to forget that we are a country, and like every sovereign country, we have a right to have immigration laws. I mean, every country, Canada has immigration laws, Mexico has immigration laws, and they enforce their laws. We have a right to do that. At the same time, we've always been a compassionate people who take into account what's in our best interest and in the common good. And in trying to balance those two things on immigration, it's a difficult endeavor, which I think as a country we need to continue to try to do in the right way, but in a way that will prove to be productive, not simply used as a political exercise by one party to try to win elections and give them an advantage over another party.
Well, we'll come to politics in a second, but I want to ask you about, you cited some statistics, and you know, you'll hear often people say you can take statistics and turn them into any argument you want. Not necessarily the majority argument, but an argument is that the Bush administration's record on deportations was way below what the Obama administration's was. You've heard this, that in this administration annually, on average, 50% more deportations than in the Bush years. net migration from Mexico in this country is at zero or even maybe a little bit negative. The Border Patrol in this country over the last decade has doubled. There are people who would say, based on those statistics and others I might cite, maybe we're getting a better handle on the problem than some who've been critical of the administration would like us to.
Well, I think the reverse is also true, though. I mean, for example, we were even debating what the numbers actually mean.
Correct.
Because I think, for example, you see instances where someone who stopped at the border and turned around is treated as a deportation. We have instances of people that aren't deported, that in fact are released into society. And so it's complicated. And again, this is a very difficult issue to solve unless you have some certainty around the law. I think what it calls to mind here is the need to fix the laws as they currently exist. We don't have a legal immigration system now that works. You have, for example, migrant labor needs in the agricultural community, and we really don't have a program in place that works well. And so you end up having a lot of people who come here for that purpose, who would like to go back home until their labor is needed again, but don't because they don't want to have to sneak in again next year. That's just one example. You also have examples of businesses who go to college campuses to interview. They have job openings. They find the most qualified candidates, and then they realize that we are training some of the world's finest physicists, scientists, and innovators, and then after we train them in our universities, we force them to leave.
Right.
We would never do that in sports, right? I mean, the Miami Heat... or the San Antonio Spurs, the runner-ups in last year's... who came within a three-pointer of winning the championship, I should say.
That's some good pandering. Some good pandering, Senator. That's good,
Anyway, you would never, if there was a 7'2" center that dominates in the paint, we're not deporting him.
You'd never send him
right,
back.
Right. So, I mean, if we're not willing to do that in sports, we got to figure out a way not to do that to our economy.
Well, and as you indicate, there's an economic consequence. You say to somebody, if you could possibly deport everybody who's in this country unlawfully, would you do it? As a practical matter, it may be impossible, but the reality is, from an economic standpoint, it would be disastrous for the economy of this country.
We're just not going to, that's not who we are.
Right.
We're not going to do it, and there aren't any serious voices that are calling for us to do it. We had a full debate in the Senate on immigration. Not a single person, including the strongest opponents of the bill, not a single person suggested that in an amendment or otherwise.
Right.
So I don't think anyone believes that that's a solution to this problem, nor is it who we are as a people. By the same token, though, it's important to remember that the arguments that are made by many who resist immigration reforms are not invalid arguments. I mean, we do have laws. I mean, you do not have a right to come to this nation illegally, nor should you act like it's a right. I think if we deal with this issue, we do so because of who we are as a people, and also because it's in our best interest as a nation to figure it out moving forward. But I don't think we should ever fall into the trap of believing that someone has a right to come here illegally either. I think that's counterproductive. Again, it's a very, very difficult issue because it goes beyond the black and white of the law. It actually goes into people, human beings, and all the circumstances that underlie a person's life and the reason why they make decisions.
Let me ask you about some of the rhetoric around this issue. We're in a campaign season here in Texas, as I know is the case in Florida, and there have been a lot of things said that have caught attention, not just in Texas but around the country, during our elections. Candidates who've referred to illegal immigration as an illegal invasion, or candidates who've compared the area of the Texas border to a third world country. It's not just Democrats who've raised concerns about that rhetoric. Many Republicans have, including some Republicans in this room, candidly have been concerned about the rhetoric around this issue. Could you talk a little bit about
Well, look,
that?
I don't think that's an accurate description of the problem. So we do have a humanitarian crisis at the border where people are dying and as they're being brought over. You pointed out that net migration from Mexico has declined, which is true. But we also, that doesn't mean the border doesn't have migration. You have a lot of people now coming from Central and South America that are transiting through Mexico and across the border, and it's a significant humanitarian crisis and places a tremendous strain on resources. So that's a legitimate issue. I would also argue that some of the harshest rhetoric I've heard is on the other side of the debate. I have heard pro-immigration activists basically accuse anyone who does not support their version of immigration reform as being anti-Hispanic and anti-immigrant. I've seen those voices also. I've seen allies of immigration reform attacked because, in the opinion of the supporters of immigration reform, they're not doing enough. So I think there are people that are involved in the immigration reform effort on the left, not simply for purposes of advancing the cause, but in fact advancing their political cause and using it as a political weapon against their adversaries. So as is the case on most issues, I think there's blame to go on both sides.
Do you think that there are Democrats who are secretly hoping that immigration reform does not succeed for the balance of this election year so it can be used as an issue against Republicans?
I wouldn't say that's a majority position in the Democratic Party, but I would say that there are clearly people involved in this debate who, in my mind, believe they'll win either way.
They benefit.
Either way. They believe if they get immigration reform, that's great, and if they don't, they can use it as a weapon in the elections. And I think some of that is reflected in the unreasonableness of some of the positions that people have taken in the past in terms of what their expectations are. I think in the past, some on the immigration reform advocacy community have created expectations that are completely unrealistic as to what immigration reform can look like, and as a result have acted as an impediment to reform in the future. That doesn't mean it's not a significant issue, but again, I do think that there are some who view this as a political advantage, and they're perfectly prepared to use it as such.
So do you, when people come to you and say, we have a challenge with people in our own party, in the Republican Party, about the words we use, the language we use to talk about this issue, that it may ultimately hurt us trying to get Latinos, Hispanics, to consider voting Republican, what do you say?
I say both parties have challenges with rhetoric. Just this weekend, I saw the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Committee say that not all Republicans are racists, which was, I think that's pretty outrageous and a statement. I think the reality is, and I'll be fair, but I'll be blunt, I think that when someone says something outrageous from the left, they don't get nearly as much criticism or scrutiny from the press as if you say it from the right. I mean, Joe Biden literally every other day makes a gaffe, and it's been accepted as that's just Joe. But if someone on the right did that, they'd be treated very differently. The president himself has made significant gaffes, and again, not treated the same way as his opponent was in the last election. So the truth be told is I think everyone today in society where the media is constantly looking to create some scandal or some sort of conflict in order to drive eyeballs to a website or viewers to a TV screen, you have to be careful and cautious about how you say things so as to not give people the opportunity to dilute from or distract from your message. But I think both parties in general face challenges. The difference is that I think that sometimes conservatives are treated very differently than liberals are by the media in regards to that.
I wonder if it's also the case that Republican Hispanics are treated differently than Democratic Hispanics. You know, here in Texas, we had the spectacle in the last Senate campaign when Senator Cruz was successful in defeating Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, of the Democratic Party chair of the state of Texas questioning whether he was legitimately Hispanic because he's of Cuban descent and not of Mexican descent, as you are of Cuban descent. Do you think that there's a difference within party politics of how Cuban-descended Hispanics and Mexican-descended Hispanics see the world?
Yeah, I'm sure there are many in the Democratic Party that believe any Republican Hispanic, no matter where their parents are from, should be
illegitimate.
I mean, there may be some. I don't think that's been my experience with my colleagues. Right. But beyond it, look, I would say to you that how you pronounce your last name is important in terms of your heritage. But what really drives me to public service, what I learned from my community, is what you've learned from yours. I think what all Americans have learned, and that is that my parents made the purpose of their life to give me the chance to do the things they never had the chance to do. What they desperately wanted was for their children to have no limits to how far they could go. And I think that's very commonplace in Hispanic and first-generation immigrant communities across the country. But I think that's true of people that are born in this country as well. And so that's something I think we can unite as a people and as a nation. But I really don't spend a lot of time complaining about how I'm treated by Hispanic media outlets or others. I think you work your way through that. It's just part of the process. I don't necessarily think it's fair, but I also don't think complaining about it's going to change it.
Let me broaden the conversation to be about Congress generally. The perception outside of Washington and maybe inside of Washington is that Congress is not working very well right now, that the system is broken. Do you think Congress is broken?
I think it's broken, but for the different reason that most people do.
Okay.
I think people think it's broken because it's not doing more. And I think we forget the Republic was designed not to do much because the founders of our country never intended for the federal government to be as involved in our country as it now is. They never intended for the federal government to have its claws into everything and every aspect of our lives. So if you look at the way the system is designed, you have to have identical bills passed two very different chambers. They have to be signed by a president. They have to stand up to constitutional scrutiny by the Supreme Court. The system is built towards slow and incremental change. But I do think it's broken for another reason, and that is that we are litigating the issues of today and yesterday and not spending nearly enough time about the challenges of tomorrow. I think we are missing the broader point that our country stands at a historic moment in history where the world around us is rapidly changing from the nature of our economy to the balance of power globally. And we are debating the small ball while some of these major issues are happening with or without our input with regards to it. You've seen a dramatic restructuring of the American economy. You've seen jobs go overseas or be automated. And the result is you've got millions of people now that are stuck in long-term unemployment. Every month that goes by that they're not employed is going to make it harder for them to re-employ. You have thousands of young people who graduated from college who have not been able to start on their lives because they haven't been able to find a job in their selected fields. You have millions of people trapped in jobs that don't pay enough to live off and no access to the educational opportunities that will allow them to get a better job. And you extrapolate that over the long term, that means people are not going to be, you're not going to have as many homeowners, you're not going to have as many people in the middle and upper income brackets. Yeah, that's going to have dramatic impacts on our country economically. We need to address those things, and we need to address them quickly. Otherwise, they become very difficult to reverse.
But where, Senator, is the midpoint? I hear you say on the one hand, government is too much involved in our lives. That was never the intent. On the other hand, I hear you saying government's not doing enough to address some of the challenges we have as a country. Where is the line you walk?
The line is you think government, there are things government can do and should do, and the rest belongs to people in the country. And I think that starts with the lack of trust. There are too many leaders in American politics that do not trust our people. They don't trust what you'll do with your own money. So they believe it would be better if they took more of your own money and spent it on your behalf, because they think that they know what to do with your money better than you do.
So you're a local control. You're a local control.
No, I'm an individual control person.
Even lower
I'm not
down,
an anarchist, right? I mean, I believe we need to have government.
Right.
So I believe that we need to have law enforcement. We need to provide for our national defense. I believe we need to have an interstate highway system. We need to have rules and regulations to people to conduct business affairs. But I also believe that you know how to spend your money better than I do in Washington, D.C. I believe that you know what school is better for your kids than I do. I believe that if I give you the freedom and the opportunity to start a business, you're going to do a better job of it than if I try to make that happen or force you to continue to work where you work today. Right. So that underlines it. The second part of it is I think we've undermined free enterprise. And the irony of it is that big government is often sold as a way to help people who are trying to make it. And yet no one is hurt more by big government than the people who are trying to make it. If you're a big corporation or a billionaire, you may or may not like big government, but you can afford to deal with it. You can hire lawyers and lobbyists to influence it and to navigate it for you. If you are trying to start a business out of the spare bedroom of your home, you cannot afford to pull 7 permits and 8 certifications. You just can't. So you end up not doing it. And the result is the country suffers. And you see it. Time and again, big businesses use the regulatory system to create impediments for competition to come against them. You see it in our tax code, where we have $4 trillion of corporate American profits sitting on the sidelines, uninvested, because we have the highest corporate tax rate combined in the entire world. You see it in our educational system, where you have these massive open online courses that are available to everyone for free, but we have no way of certifying them so people can get degrees based on that coursework. You have people coming back from serving in the Middle East in our military, and then we force them to spend $2,000 to take a course on the Middle East in college. These are the sorts of things that make no sense. And so I think there's things government can do to open up more sectors of our economy to choice and to innovation, so that we can address these issues in ways that our people can address.
So the conventional definition of Congress being broken, at least I've heard from one person who is a Democrat recently say, is that even the do-nothing Congress, the famous do-nothing Congress, was something like 6 times more productive in terms of the number of bills it passed. You actually have no problem with Congress not passing a whole lot of bills because you think that Congress should be more and more out of this stuff.
It depends what bills they want to pass.
Yeah.
So if they want to pass a balanced budget, I'm for it.
Yeah.
If they want to raise taxes on everybody, you know, in order to fund the latest experiment, I'm against it.
You're opposed to that.
If they want to create certainty in our regulatory code so that our water is clean and our air is breathable, but you allow people to open businesses and create jobs, I'm for it. Yeah. If what they want to do is take the latest study by some professor at an Ivy League school and put it into our regulatory code, I'm against it. So it just, you know, I think part of what you're seeing today is a very different view of government's role in our country between the Senate leadership and the president, who promised that all of this government would help improve the lives of people who are trying to make it, and the reality that today we have record numbers of people on unemployment, record numbers of people on long-term disability, record numbers of people that have been unemployed for 6 months or longer, record numbers of students defaulted on their loans. The fact of the matter is the people who they claimed they were going to help are worse off today than they were 6 years ago. And I think that in and of itself is a case for trying something different, something that's 21st century, something that's built on the values that made America special, particularly opportunity, work, and free enterprise.
I want to come to the president in a second, but I want to ask you if the way the parties are structured in Congress right now is itself part of the conversation. You were Tea Party before Tea Party was cool, we might say. You got elected as somebody who was associated with the values of the Tea Party, and you know the fact is the Republican Party in Congress, members of the Republican Party in Congress are not all united, just as Democrats are not. There is often said to be a rift between what might be thought of as more traditional Republicans, business-oriented Republicans, and Tea Party Republicans. Has that been overstated? Is that part of what's going on here?
I think it's misunderstood. I don't think
Help
there's
us
any,
understand.
well, I don't think there's any rift on what the role of government should be.
Yeah.
I think all Republicans, and including many independents and some Democrats, believe that government plays an important but limited role in our country, that there are more important institutions in our country than government. You know, I believe what happens in families and homes will have a much greater impact on the future of our country than what happens in the Capitol. I believe that, that individuals who are given the opportunity to take their life savings and risk it to open up a new business are going to create many more jobs than we ever will with the law that we pass. That doesn't mean there's no role for government. There's an important role. I think that I don't think there's any debate in the party about those principles. I think the debates have largely been tactical about how you approach putting that in place. Should you oppose everything? Should you try to find common ground on some things? And I think that's, you know, there's a tactical debate in the party, but I think...
Is that a healthy debate to have?
It is, but I think over time it will work itself out because I believe, for example, that Republicans will win the majority in the Senate this year. And when we do, we're going to have an opportunity to be about something, not simply to be against bad ideas, but to actually propose some good ideas, like some of the ones we've worked on developing this year, whether it's reforms to our anti-poverty programs, creating more opportunities for people to go to college or get higher education, providing retirement security, ideas about generating economic growth. I think we're going to have a positive agenda that people will be able to unite around.
What's kept you from having a positive agenda or from proposing some of those ideas under the current situation?
I am proposing them.
Yeah,
We've
but you're saying, though, that a change if you take back over the Senate.
Oh, well, they won't let us vote on them now.
Right.
I mean, Harry Reid doesn't even allow me to file an amendment on a bill.
Right.
And that's not just me, that's any Republican. If I stood up on the floor of the Senate today and tried to tack on one of my ideas to a bill, he uses a procedural trick to cut that off.
Cuts it off.
And not just Republicans, Democrats as well.
Right.
It is the first time in a long time in the history of the Senate, once called the greatest deliberative body in the world, that a majority leader does not allow other senators to offer ideas and have a debate and a vote. And as a result, the people of Florida somehow are represented by the senator of Nevada because he limits what we can stand for and what we can say. I think that's outrageous.
So because we're all about modeling good behavior and turning the other cheek, when the Republicans take back the Senate, if they do in November, you will allow Democrats to do what you're being precluded from doing.
I certainly hope that our leadership will, because I think the process works better that way. Hey, I was the Speaker of the Florida House.
You know this
I had
stuff,
to stand there and listen to a lot of bad ideas from the Democrats be debated, but I gave them their vote and their time.
Right.
And And you know, often politically it was painful because the media took their side on some issue, even though it was misrepresented. But the process worked better that way. And at the end, I felt that the people who they represented, though I didn't agree with them, deserved their voice to be heard. What we have now today in the Senate is something very different. And the ones who are being cheated are the American people. I don't think the Senate was ever designed to be run by one person.
You described the president in not entirely surprisingly unflattering terms a few minutes ago. I asked you if Congress is broken. Is the presidency broken, or is it this president?
I think this president's made some significant errors, and for a couple of reasons. First of all, let me just say I have nothing against him as a person. From everything I've read and seen, I don't know him well personally, but he appears to be a great father and a great husband, and I have no doubt he loves his country. The problem is, I think that he suffers from three things. The first is a level of competence that wasn't up to the job. I mean, we forget that we elected someone who was a state senator who had been in the U.S. Senate for 2 years before he began campaigning. And I do think that the job is overwhelming for anyone, much less someone who has never had that level of experience. And second is, I think he suffered from an ideological deficiency in the sense that his ideas about what would work do not work. And I don't think that's unique to him. I think that's in general the left. I think the left, by and large, comes from a world of theory, the world the way they think it should be, not the way it actually is. I think that's been pronounced on foreign relations, for example. The world we all wish we had was a peaceful world where every country thought the way we did, everyone wanted peace and prosperity, and everyone played by the rules. That's the world we wish we had. The world we have is one that's very different. We have a world where countries and individual leaders decide that they don't care about the rules that the world has agreed to. They're going to operate on their own set of rules. That means invading a neighboring country. That means deciding that an entire portion of the sea belongs to them. That means openly talking about using nuclear weapons to wipe off the face of the earth the Jewish people and the Jewish state. That is the world as it is. So in an ideal world, all the countries that we're allies with would all do their part, stand up, and contribute towards the effort to stand up to that stuff. In the world as it truly is, it takes American leadership. And in the absence of American leadership, it doesn't happen. And you've seen this all over the world, where chaos has been created each time America stepped back from its role as a leader. I'm very careful when I talk about that, because I'm not advocating that we invade every country we have a problem with. I'm not advocating that we get into open armed conflict everywhere in the world. In fact, if we are truly engaged in the world, we won't have to do that. If we have military power that's unquestionably superior to that of the rest of the world, if we are actively engaged in being a friend to our friend and a trouble to our enemies all over the world, I think that we will never have to engage militarily, certainly not as often as perhaps some think I'm talking about. I think a strong and engaged America on the global stage makes the world a safer place. And you know who agrees with me? Our allies all over the world. I just came back from Asia in February, where the number one message I took away is, we want America more involved. Even the Philippines, that asked us to leave the Philippines 20 years ago, is now asking us to come back. Japan wants a closer relationship with America. South Korea wants a closer relationship with America. And in recent weeks, Ukraine wants a closer relationship with America. My point is, the world wants American leadership. The French foreign minister said it very clearly. Without American leadership, a void is left behind and no one is leading. And I think we need to recognize we may not like that role, but we're the only ones that can play it. And if we do not play it, the lessons of history are very clear. We can ignore these problems all over the world, but they will not ignore us. Eventually, they will find their way here. And that's never been more true than today, when we have such an interconnected world economically, culturally, etc. So.
On the subject of the president, let me ask you about the Affordable Care Act. So we're told that now 7.5 million Americans have signed up for insurance through the exchanges. The White House is prepared to declare victory, which may be a relative thing given where they were when the website healthcare.gov launched. Anything would look good compared to what was happening in those early days. Your opinion, I feel confident, on the Affordable Care Act has not changed.
No, and I'll tell you why. The numbers don't lie. So let's suppose that all 7.5 million people who signed up actually end up paying the premiums on a regular basis throughout the year.
Right.
The vast majority of people that have signed up, the purpose of Obamacare was to deal with the problem of the uninsured. Okay? Yeah. The majority of Americans were insured. The majority of Americans were insured through their employer. The majority of Americans were insured through their employers and had insurance they were happy with. That is a fact. That doesn't mean that the number of Americans that were not insured is insignificant. 1% is too many, and we have to address that. Obamacare was passed under the guise of helping that 18% of Americans that did not have health insurance or did not have health insurance they could afford.
Yep.
That's what we're supposed to be addressing. 7.5 million people have signed up for the exchanges. The enormous majority of them used to be insured anyway.
Had insurance.
They just basically moved them from one insurance plan to another insurance plan. The only difference is their co-payments and their deductibles are not higher, and the doctor they used to see may or may not be on that plan anymore. So then what you have is a small sliver of people that were not insured before that are insured now, and I'm sure for them it's better. But we've disrupted the entire American health insurance marketplace. We've disrupted health insurance for everyone. The doctors you can see, how medicine is practiced, everything, to basically make a small, minuscule dent on the problem of the uninsured. So if I told you today that we are going to unravel and impact 100% of 100% of our people's health insurance in exchange for helping 1% or 2% of our people, you would say that's not a good trade-off. And the good news is there's a better way to do it. And that's by allowing more choice and transparency to enter the healthcare marketplace, by allowing individuals to have control of their own healthcare dollars through health savings accounts, through being able to buy health insurance on an individual marketplace, the kind of insurance that they want from any company that will sell it to you, by building in even more transparency in how health insurance is priced, by incentivizing states to take on efforts for tort reform so we can lower the use of defensive medicine that drives up premiums for everybody. These efforts, and through a high-risk pool at the state level, because there are people who are chronically ill that cannot be insured because they're always guaranteed to be sick, and the state should step in and help people in that circumstance. That would have made a much bigger dent on our uninsured problem without disrupting the system, without costing as much money as this is going to cost, and without creating the problems this is now going to create.
As a practical matter, how do you unpack this, or how do you unwind this? So let's assume everything you're saying is taken at face value, it's all true. What do you do now?
I don't think you can unwind it unless you explain to the American people what you're going to do instead. And that's why we're working on that.
Right.
On being able to develop at some point over the next few weeks a plan that says, here's what we should be doing instead. This is what we should do with the existing system, and this is how we should go. This is the new direction we should go, which will be better for everybody.
Right.
It would be a mistake to say, let's just go back to the way things were, because we had too many people uninsured. I think a better approach is to repeal what Obamacare has done, but at the same time to replace it with new ideas that will allow people to buy their health insurance, but give individuals more choices as to how they spend their health care money, where they spend their health care money, and what kind of insurance they buy. Not everyone wants the same insurance.
As a practical matter, Senator, can that happen before the end of this administration or the beginning of the next?
Not unless we have 60 Republican senators or 4 Democrats willing to work for us.
So
but we can certainly start putting in place the intellectual foundations of what a new system would look like.
So let's assume it's going to take a new president to do this. Is that going to be you?
Miami Heat.
I don't know.
They didn't do the buzzer.
I have a...
What's wrong with these guys? You say Congress is broken, your buzzer's broken.
I have a sound effect for people who don't answer questions also.
Here's my answer to that question. Look, I like serving in public office.
Right.
Despite the fact that there are other things I want to do with my life eventually, and as well. I don't want to be in public office my entire life. I enjoy what I do. I'm honored to do it. And I enjoy serving in the Senate. And I'll have to make a decision next year, one way or the other, because my term expires in 2016.
And you've already committed not to running for both.
Well, what I said is, I don't think if you decide to run for president, you can be saying, and if this fails, I'm going to run for the Senate. I think you've got to be focused on that.
That's not a knock at Rand Paul, is it?
Everyone makes their own decision. That's my criteria for me. I mean, so my criteria is that if I decide that how I want to serve this country next is from the highest office in the land, I'm going to be focused on that.
100%.
And I'm going to believe that I'm not just capable of the job, but I know exactly what I'm going to do. I will just say this. I believe the next president of the United States is going to have historic challenges and historic opportunities, and therefore needs to understand the unique opportunity before our country today. The next president of the United States, if he or she serves 2 terms, will not be able to finish their term without reforming Social Security and Medicare, especially Medicare. It will go bankrupt during that period of time unless significant reforms are taken to save it. That's going to have to happen. The next president of the United States will deal with a major international crisis of some magnitude, whether it is a, God forbid, another terrorist attack, or China acting on its ambitions, or nuclear Iran, or Russia continuing to expand its reach in Eastern Europe. And we better have a clear understanding of what America's role is in the world and what we can do to prevent those things from happening. By the same token, the next president of the United States is going to inherit a country that is having massive growth in its energy sector and the impact that could have in the creation of 2 to 3 million new jobs, a massive expansion of the middle class all over the world, which means millions of people that can now afford to buy the things we build, the products we make, the services we offer. A creative people, I think, among our young people today, the greatest generation of collaborators in human history. I think that it'll be the most entrepreneurial generation in human history. And as we make advances in technology, it will be easier than ever to start a new business using internet access. You won't need a whole office to support it. These are real opportunities. I believe with all of my heart that with some appropriate redirection and re-embracing these powerful principles that made America the greatest nation on earth, I believe the 21st century can be the American century too. I believe there is no reason why the next generation of Americans cannot be the freest and most prosperous people that ever walked the earth. But that won't happen on its own. It will require our leaders, especially our next president, to recognize that opportunity and to turn the page on the 20th century. Yesterday is over.
When do you
decide?
We need to
move forward.
When do you decide?
After the Heat beat the Spurs in the finals this year.
So what you're saying is you may never be president.
I think
that was a layup, honestly.
Yeah, I know. I wanted to even out. I felt bad about last year. So,
all right.
No, here's the thing. I mean, I think that the decision will have to be made early next year, one way or the other. And so, look, I continue to. There's no difference what I'm doing now from what I would do. I'm very engaged around the country in helping Republicans win Senate elections. I always I like reaching out and speaking to different groups about what's happening in our country, and we'll continue to do that. Continue to work on ideas in the Senate. And we'll cross that bridge when we get to that.
You're not going to be dissuaded by Jeb Bush or another Floridian running?
No, I think. Listen, I'm a big admirer of Jeb Bush, and him and I are close. He's been very important in my career to me. But I think when you reach that point that you're running for an office of that magnitude, your decisions are about you, not about somebody else. And that doesn't mean that you disrespect the other people that are running, but you just feel like there's something unique about you that qualifies you at that moment in our history to do that job. I'm sure that's how he's going to make his decision as well.
Right. Before we go to the audience for questions, because the Texas media is in part here covering this event, Feed the Beast. Say something about Cruz and Perry and the prospect of them both running for
Well, I think that, Rick Perry's been the governor of one of the most important states in the country for the better part of 12 years now, and I think has a record he can run on. In that regard, I don't know him well personally, but I agree with, as I do with most Republican leaders, on virtually everything he stands for. And the same is true for, Ted. Ted and I have only served in the Senate for a short period of time, have similar backgrounds, but I think he's a very compelling spokesperson for conservative principles in this country and has excited a lot of people. So I think they would be formidable opponents.
Does the idea that many people think that the next Republican president should be a governor and not a senator because Washington and therefore Washington politicians are the problem, does that put you off at all?
I don't know if the office qualifies you for it. I think what's more important is the next president of the United States better have a vision about what the 21st century looks like. Stop telling us that we can be like the 20th century again, or that we'll never be like the 20th century again. We don't want to be the 20th century. The 20th century happened. We were proud of what we achieved at that period of time in our country, but we have a future ahead of us that we're excited about. The next president of the United States better be able to describe that to the American people and tell them how we're going to get there.
Got it. We're going to go to questions. Eddie, is that right?
There's a microphone right under.
Okay. Would you walk the microphone around? We do this at every one of these. We give you an opportunity to join the conversation. What we ask is please be respectful, no speeches, ask a question so we can get as many questions in as possible. Hands up. I've certainly got more questions. Mr. Hammond in the very back. I see Mr. Hammond from 50 paces. Go ahead. Microphone's coming your way. If you want to just use your outside voice, you're welcome to do that too.
In terms of their, shall we say, trustworthiness of implementing an immigration bill, as you spoke to. In your opinion, is there anything that the administration could do to buttress the trust relationship between itself and the House Republicans to aid in the passage of comprehensive or some form of immigration reform?
Anything we can do to fix this between the
Yeah,
House Republicans and the
I think this administration has probably reached the point of irreconcilable differences with regards to trust, particularly with Republicans, whether it's the selective enforcement of aspects of the health care law or in other instances, a willingness to simply ignore the law and move forward. I think it's extremely problematic. But I would just add that I go beyond just the administration. I think one of the arguments I often heard as I was out there talking about the Senate bill was, this is what happened in 1986. In 1986, they passed an immigration reform bill. 3 million people were legalized, and they never did the enforcement part. And 3 million became 12 million. And that's an argument we need to have an answer for because it's a legitimate point that is raised. And that's why I continue to argue that a sequential process is going to be critical. We must put in place enforcement reforms that ensure that this will never happen again, that people, I think the American people are prepared to address this issue once and for all as long as they know this isn't going to happen again. And I really do. I think we've reached that point. So it's a challenge to kind of figure out what exactly that is that people need to see before they're prepared to take the next step. And I'm not sure I have the answer for that yet.
Well, you're not giving people in this room a lot of optimism that something can happen in the next 2 years.
So here's what I would say. I think there's a lot of portions of immigration reform that there's agreement on. I really do. I think this country's prepared, and there's a consensus behind the idea that our legal immigration system should become merit-based and economics-based, not simply family-based. I think we're ready to do that. I think there's the belief that we shouldn't be asking PhDs and physicists, scientists, et cetera, and innovators and investors and entrepreneurs to leave the country. I think the American people agree that we need to improve the way we enforce the law. I think there's agreement that we can do all of that. And I also think there's agreement that in the interim we've got to do something to stabilize the lives of those who are here illegally so that they can become and continue to incorporate themselves into American life. I think what you're asking me is, how do you reach that point where you reach permanency and then citizenship? And I think that's going to be very difficult to do until these other things happen first. That's just an honest assessment of where the process is at today.
Okay. Mr. Nixon.
Could you comment a minute on the imperial presidency and the executive order process that he's going through the regulatory agencies? Is there any activity or momentum in Senate or House to try to rein in this process that he's undertaking?
There is, but it would require both chambers to act. And obviously the Senate Democratic leadership has largely applauded many of these executive decisions that have been made and these decisions that have been undertaken by the administration. There are some legal ways, but you know, that's to work its way through the courts. And oftentimes, by the time they work their way through the courts, the person's no longer president. So it's a real challenge. I don't think that this president has openly bragged about the fact that he doesn't need Congress to act. He has a pen and a phone, he says, and he's going to use that to run the country.
Right.
And I think that has a corrosive impact on the republic that has undermined his presidency in the long term.
Not the first president to use the power of executive orders to execute his will.
That may be, but the bottom line is I think it's had a dramatic impact on his ability to govern, not to mention that it's been compounded by a real divisiveness. I think it's hard to believe, but in 2008, this president was elected on the slogan of hope and change. He was going to unify the American people. We were going to put old divisions in the past and come together to solve our problems. He really hasn't governed that way, especially after the loss in 2010. It's largely now been dedicated to creating fractures, convincing one group of Americans that their lives are not doing well because of the fault of another group of Americans. And that's been their theme now for the better part of 4 years, that if you don't agree with them on an issue, you're a bad person and you don't care about people. And I think that's undermined his ability to govern as well.
So, of course, the challenge, though, Senator, is that if a Republican, say you, becomes president, then if you strip the power of executive orders from this president, that would roll forward, and you would also not have that. In the same way that the change in the cloture vote may look smart now for the Democrats, but if Republicans take the majority back, they may wish they hadn't done that.
Well, I think the Constitution and our laws apply no matter who wins an election. It doesn't, executive orders are supposed to exist for purposes of enforcing the law, not for purposes of writing or creating the law. Now, there are some areas like foreign policy and national defense where the president should have more flexibility. But on domestic affairs,
right.
If I or any other Republican were president, I would insist that they tolerate and support and not undermine the legislative process. It can be messy sometimes. It can take time to get to where you want to go. But I think it's a mistake to undermine our constitutional republic for purposes of achieving some goal or policy aim that you have. One of the things that's allowed us to be a special and free country is that we adhere to those rules, despite the fact that it may not always turn out the way we want it to turn out. We believe that our constitutional way of government is more important than any idea that we may think is so special. And I think having a president that doesn't have a lot of adherence to that principle has truly set back his ability to implement his agenda.
Ma'am.
Buenas tardes y muchas gracias por visitar a San Antonio.
Muchas gracias.
We're very thankful that you're here today. I just didn't hear you mentioning anything, going back to immigration, about work permits. You mentioned that those people that cross the border to work here don't go back because they don't know if they can return. So is your plan going to include some type of a work permit?
Yes.
So that they can visit, work like the Bracero program that we had many years ago? I think that would alleviate a little bit of the issues of not being able to go back. Could you tell us a little
Absolutely.
bit?
Say a
In
word
fact,
about
the bill that we passed has that in place. It reforms the agricultural workers program so that, in fact, for example, in agriculture, it creates the ability for people to come here temporarily to work as seasonal workers, return home, and come back again. It's not just limited, by the way, to agriculture. We extend that to other industries as well. There is opposition to it. And I want to tell you where the opposition comes from. It comes from labor unions, to be fair. Labor unions fight us tooth and nail on any sort of expansion in these sorts of programs where there's seasonal labor needs. The law was built so that the job would first have to be available and advertised to Americans. And if Americans, people living here now, didn't apply for those jobs, then you would qualify to issue a permit. So there's two separate issues, and you're right to bifurcate them. You have people that look to move here permanently and live here for the rest of their lives, and you have people that want to come here for purposes of seasonal labor and then return back to their home country and come back again if they're needed in the future. That process today does not work well either. And anyone who's in one of those industries in this room that relies on that sort of labor will tell you how difficult it is to use the existing system. And as a result, since the system doesn't work, you've basically created an incentive for people to do it the wrong way. And that's why I think the legal immigration system has to be reformed. And on that point, despite the objections of the labor unions, I think we can find consensus.
Are there adequate Republican votes, you think, to
There's some resistance
provide-
in the Republican Party to that notion as well. You always hear arguments that with the unemployment rate so high, why are we creating temporary work for non-Americans? You do hear those arguments out there. But again, the way we've written the law, the way the law should be applied, those jobs would first have to be offered to people living here, and only then could you then offer it to someone from abroad. But I believe we could pass that. If that were the one issue we were debating, I think the votes would be there on both sides. Yeah.
Okay. Eddie, is that it? That's it. All right, Senator, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.